much, Alec, for your welcome, and thank you for inviting me to speak to this gathering. I'll start by saying that, unlike Alec, I'm not blinkered and have never been, and the reason for that is that I've had this issue thrust at me almost throughout my career, and I'm going to come on and explain what I mean by that. But I think before I go any further, I just want to say that we're really delighted to support Mark and the great work that is being done by InterEngineering. We've worked with you since you formed InterEngineering in 2014, and the report we've got here, and we'll have the opportunity to read, represents a really frank and challenging snapshot of the realities that are faced by lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender individuals within engineering. It's got the Academy's strong support, and it has my own personal support. So I want to just go back to why it's been thrust at me for such a long time by talking a little bit about my background and the first part of my career, actually for 35 years, so it's probably the largest part of my career. I worked in an environment that had institutionalized prejudice written right into it. It is, of course, the armed forces, and for all my frontline career and much of my career afterwards, once I stopped serving in the front line, being LGBT was not just not accepted, it was illegal for LGBT people to be employed, and they were dismissed summarily, sometimes with disgrace, if they were discovered or if they disclosed. Now, it's hardly surprising that in such an environment where it was the law of the land, institutionalized homophobia and prejudice was writ throughout it. It's effectively what we as employees were told to do. Now, at a personal level, it of course resulted in many people being treated in a way that today would be viewed as utterly shameful, illegal, and an offence against natural justice. It damaged a huge number of people's lives. I knew them, I saw them being damaged. I suspect it destroyed many people's lives as well. And we also know now quite how pointless it was. Firstly, on a practical level, it forced out of the armed forces people who we desperately needed, people who were doing a perfectly good job of work, in many cases a really good job of work, but they were viewed as a security risk, and they were viewed as a risk to morale. No one at the time gave serious thought to the fact that these policies were actually the cause of the security risk and the cause of morale problems. And when forced to change by society's changing views that eventually resulted in legislation change, there was a huge inbuilt resistance to be overcome, and this deeply ingrained culture of institutional prejudice. Now, I have to say that I wouldn't blame any individual at the time. You know, it's what the system required of every serving person in the armed forces. But times change, and times can change really very quickly. And the armed forces as institutions have been very bold, and in many cases are now exemplars. And I think there are two reasons why they've been able to change as fast as they have. The first is that new people come into employment with very different views. Young people have different views to those only half a generation ahead. And in organisations like the armed forces, which are continually refreshed with new blood coming in, people who've been through a much more enlightened education system, and where people actually don't stay that long, maybe 10, 20, in my case 34 years, but most people didn't stay that long, then actually culture can change really quite quickly. But the other thing, which I think is much more relevant to us here, is high quality and determined leadership. And I think if you look at what's happened in the armed forces over the last decade, or maybe a bit more, there has been some really good, high-quality leadership where people have driven this change from the top. And that's what we need in our profession. And this, as this excellent report makes clear, we've got a very long way to go. Many of us, most of us in this room, we are those leaders, and we absolutely can't absolve ourselves of the responsibility to lead. Now, also on a personal basis, I've had the great privilege of working with Lord Brown for 5 years. John Brown, Lord Brown of Madingley, who was president of the Royal Academy of Engineering for those 5 years. And it was a period of extraordinary change in his life. When I started working for him, he was the chief executive of BP. A year later, he wasn't. And I watched him transform his life and go through a period of extraordinary challenge. And I learned a huge amount about the issues that he faced. I strongly commend his books to you, actually all of them, but particularly his first book, when he goes into some detail about it all. And I saw how a man, I have to say, a man of particular personal strength and courage came through it, but boy, did it take personal strength and courage. So that's enough of my experience, and I just want to touch on what the Academy is doing and why. Clearly we face a very well documented skills gap. The latest figures from Engineering UK estimate that it's 182,000 new people with engineering skills that we're going to need every year till, actually it's over a 10-year period, to 2022 when the benchmark was set, but we haven't made much progress. And that challenge demands that we work much harder to make engineering an attractive profession, an attractive destination for many, many more people, and to ensure that those who do enter the profession stay there because they feel welcomed. Now, gender and ethnicity are the two characteristics that have arguably received the most focus within engineering. Sexual orientation is often a hidden characteristic that can't be measured by, certainly can't be measured by visible difference, but that makes it no less important. In fact, perhaps it makes it more important. The sample in the report that we're going to see indicates representation of around 6% of the engineering workforce, but we can't be certain of that because people don't necessarily disclose. It's a level that's slightly lower than female representation within engineering, but it's certainly also comparable with black and ethnic minority representation in the sector, a sector which, of course, is historically white, male, and heterosexual, with deep-seated cultural norms that present considerable barriers and perceived personal risk to individuals who identify themselves as LGBT. So for this reason, we face a starting position where individuals in this underrepresented group can feel that the negative consequences of coming out at work are just too great. And this fact is borne out in this report and by surveys in recent years, including one that the IAT published in 2014. And as a result, LGBT engineers often remain unknown to their organisations, to their immediate team members, and perhaps especially to those team members, to the extent that their alienation goes unrecognised and unchallenged. So the Academy has a diversity programme which we've been running with government funding and with pretty much all the professional engineering institutions signed up through our diversity concordat. And this concordat asks for public commitment to diversity, an institution action plan to move diversity and inclusion forward, and also monitoring of progress. They're easy things to say, they take affirmative action to make happen. We also work with employers, many of whom are PEI corporate partners, through our diversity leadership group. And these employers are also considering how they can embrace greater diversity within their companies as one of the means of alleviating the skills shortages. And while the bulk of the attention within this work has been on gender and ethnicity, some employers are taking tangible action to support LGBT employees. At the Academy, we've held 2 LGBT-specific events. One was a large forum in 2014 to open up discussion about LGBT in engineering, and one which we held with a smaller group of employers in 2015 to explore how employer-led action could be linked with the grassroots approach that InterEngineering is leading on. We're now shifting the focus of our diversity programme more towards inclusion, as exemplified in a report we published last year on diversity and inclusion, a case study toolkit, and there are copies available around the room for you to take away with you today. The focus of change is deliberate, and the reasons are reflected in the findings of this report. So engineering companies and organisations have got to develop and demand internal cultures that are genuinely and consistently accepting, respecting, and welcoming of difference. Without this, We're never going to reach that position where those people who feel marginalised and are hidden, such as those who are LGBT, can feel confident to bring their whole selves to work and to be themselves and make themselves known. Without reliable data to measure the LGBT representation in engineering, we may never be able to quantify the extent of underrepresentation, and we do face that as a trigger for action. We can look to other sectors to see the sort of progress that we must emulate, and I do agree that it's shocking that our progress has been so slow. If you look at the security services, for example, they've taken active change, they've been active and progressive in their inclusion of LGBT staff. And again, a bit like the armed forces, it's for very good reason, and that is that the risk of isolation as a security risk rather than the fact of homosexuality itself. In diversity work, there's always a danger of seeking to categorise individuals and to fix the problems relating to those categories. And by focusing instead on inclusion, which is what we're going to be doing, the aim is to create an environment that actively engages and values everyone without prejudice, regardless of whether they are declared as part of an underrepresented group or not. Now, the Academy has got a key role to play by challenging our employer and our institution stakeholders, and by continuing our support for important grassroots organisations such as InterEngineering. We all here have a role to play through our own members and our own corporate partners. And I come back to leadership. It's the leadership that we have to exercise to make change happen. I also happen to believe, as I hope I explained at the outset, that I feel that we have a strong sense of moral responsibility to do this. So I really do commend this report to you. We're taking it very seriously, and we're going to seek to do whatever we can